Thank you so much for staying with us. Professor Kenneth Amaechi joins us this morning. He's Chair, Sustainable Finance, European University Institute, Florence. He is also Chief Economic Advisor to the Imo State government. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Prof. Well, I'm sure you've listened to a little bit of the conversations that we have had this morning. And as Markwell raised the issue earlier, how do we integrate this whole idea of the federal government at the state level? Perhaps we want to begin first with what challenges do you think people need to be aware of that a state government, Imo State government, for instance, has that could be slowing down development that people need to be aware of?
Okay, good morning, and thank you for having me. Just permit me to go back a bit before I situate it or contextualize it within the Imo State environment. So what this 8-point agenda is actually talking about is the Sustainable Development Goals. But we haven't framed it like that. I know we say, well, it's nothing new, it's nothing spectacular in that sense, but the creativity of it lies in the fact that it links, or they link back to the Sustainable Development Goals. And for that to work well, I want to argue that we need to have a comprehensive understanding of sustainability. We also need to have sustainability thinking in practice, in action, because that's one way to make it work. Otherwise, it will keep hanging. And when it comes to the implementation of sustainability or the Sustainable Development Goals, we also need to recognize the interdependencies. So there's a link between food security and poverty. There's a link between insecurity and unemployment. So if you're a minister and you're charged with these different aspects of the development goals, you also need to find a way of talking to each other. I think it's been said that the implementation is key. I agree with that, but that implementation can also be encumbered, especially if the ministers are not on the same page with the senators, or they're not on the same page with members of House of Rep, or even the civil service. So how do you carry the civil service along? Because when it comes to sustainability and sustainability thinking, we need to ensure that it's well embedded in the system, and that's where socialization matters. And going back to your point about the states, I would argue that the federal government needs to have a proper handshake with the states, because even if you're talking about investment will need to be localized. So they need to come into states, and some of these policies or agenda that are being set will need to find spaces within states to function.
Well,
so going back to your question about Imo State, I would argue that unemployment is one of the critical things that His Excellency Senator Hope Uzodimma is working hard on through his 3R agenda. The 3R are reconstruction, rehabilitation, and recovery. So rehabilitation is about empowering our people, and that way we're able to deal with the problems of unemployment.
Well, Prof, job creation happens at the states. Economic growth for the nation will reflect in the states. So it goes back to, the issues that you raised, the other time about, what the state government has to encounter and all of those things. You've identified job creation as a critical challenge. So how do we deal with it? What does the federal government have to say or do? You said that there needs to be a proper handshake between the federal government and the state government. So far, what is lacking? The federal government has rolled out some initiatives, especially in the agricultural sector, that is expected to provide some jobs. What is lacking at this current moment?
We can see the handshake happening in different instances, but I think we need to do much more. But coming specifically to the case of Imo State, I would argue that the governor started by creating an industrial policy, which was launched back in November 2022, which is primarily based on sustainability and sustainability thinking. Because what he's talked about as the 8-point agenda, as I mentioned, is all about the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you look at Imo State's industrial policy today, is fundamentally based on the principles of sustainability. And beyond that, we are also thinking about the industrial policy meeting Imo State where Imo State is. So it's all about job creation. So we're looking for investors that are also hungry and passionate about making profits in ways that contribute to job creation. The governor also has launched the initiative, which is on digital skills, and he's committed to training about 300,000 Imo youths over a 3-year period. So imagine a situation whereby some youths in Imo State can stay in Owerri or any part of Imo State and work for companies abroad because they have the digital skills that will enable those jobs to be outsourced to people in Imo State. It might not even be people from, organizations that are based abroad, but think about Lagos, for example. People in Lagos or companies in Lagos or Abuja or Port Harcourt can outsource some of their jobs to people in Imo State. And as you agree with me, the cost of living is, of course, cheaper in Imo State compared to somebody working in Lagos or further afield. So, and that way also, Imo State has a lot of graduates, because you may wonder and ask, why do we have high unemployment? We have become, our success in a way has become our problem, because Imo State has a lot of graduates and Imo State can't absorb all these graduates. So they migrate to Lagos or to Abuja or wherever they can find greener pastures. But the idea here is also to think about how we can retain these young people in Imo State and in that way enhance the value retention. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, the state is also pursuing an agenda we call the One Kindred, One Business Initiative. It's called OKOBI, OKOBI, One Kindred, One Business Initiative. So when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and the need to create jobs, we also need to speak to, we need to find a way to domesticate and indigenize that thinking. And that's what we are doing in Imo State.
But
because if you look...
Pardon me, Mr. Professor Meshi, beyond Imo State, let's look at it on a larger scale. And I refer to the president's broadcast of last month, where he promised 75 billion naira credit to big businesses and, some amount also, I can't immediately recall now, to nano businesses. Now that the Federal Executive Council has been inaugurated, they've had their inaugural meeting, and we've also seen the promise of 50 million jobs, but the question always is, where is the how? There is the promises, but what's the how? What's the implementation plan? What level of coordination do you expect to see with the ministers and the governors, such that that plan for the transformation of the economy as promised by the federal government will be implemented?
That's a very good question. And it's going back to the point I was trying to make. If you look at the recent report, that is the National Bureau of Statistics report, it says that 75% of the employment recorded is in the informal sector and the agricultural sector. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the Nigerian economy is about 75% informal and also based on agrarian characteristics. So if you put it that way, then the question is, how can the different states speak to that informality? And that's exactly what we're doing in Imo State. Sorry, I'm going back to Imo State because it gives me the opportunity to concretize the response you're looking for. So what we are doing in Imo State then is to ensure that we indigenize. So using our Umunna system, the Igbo community is made up of Umunna, that is kindred. And how can those kindreds be transformed to economic productive units? And that way we are able to bring down the rhetoric from, up high there to the everyday reality that people face. Jobs are about individuals. Individuals exist in families, individuals exist in kindreds, and therefore we need to meet them where they are. Otherwise, we talk about policies that are hanging out there and they don't have mechanisms to be translated to the way that it meets people where they are. And that's exactly what we are doing in Imo State. So the conceptualization is great, and we talked about implementation, but we need to meet people where they are. And the One Kindred, One Business Initiative, championed by the Imo State government under the leadership of Governor Hope Uzodinma, I think is one way of showcasing that some of these practices can really be implemented.
Beyond Imo State, you talked about the need for a handshake between the federal government and the governors. What level of coordination do you expect to see between the relevant ministries, for instance, the Ministry of Trade and Investment, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, and the Ministry of Labor and Employment? What kind of engagement do you expect to see between the ministers leading these ministries and the state governors, such that plan for transformation will be executed successfully?
I would say one way to go about it is to bring the states on board to talk about their peculiarities. Imo State is not the same as Edo State. Imo State is not the same as Sokoto State. So these states understand their needs more than somebody who is out there in Abuja making policies. And the other point I try to emphasize is the issue of indigenization, customization. Let us translate these principles and theories or frameworks to meet people where they are. I keep using that phrase, meeting people where they are, because each state is different. And say, for example, there was a time the federal government pursued the one local government, one product. Okay, why didn't it work? A product is not necessarily a business. Therefore, if I say I produce cashew nuts, it might be a product for my local government, but how then can that be converted to a business, and so that product becomes part of the value chain, either for local production or global production?
Well, Prof, doesn't that also raise the question of collaboration among the regions? I mean, you said it's important for us to meet people where they are. The states are in the regions. There are those who have suggested that the states should form themselves into economic hubs. So the Saudis, for instance, will make itself an economic hub, focus on a particular thing for the Nigerian economy. The Northeast will do the same. The Middle Belt, the North Central would do the same, create themselves into economic hub. Do you think that is something that should be considered and championed, especially by the governors in the Nigerian Governors Forum?
That's a brilliant point, and I encourage them to do so. But it's not a top-down approach. It's something, again, that the different states and regions will need to come together and think in ways that work for them. When we constructed or came up with the Imo State industrialization policy, it considered those sectors that will link Imo State with the rest of the Southeast. Because Imo State is at the heart, and call it the Eastern Heartland, of course, but it is very more central to the southeastern states. So we looked at those sectors that can connect with Abia State, maybe Aba, or can connect with Nnewi in Anambra, or with Ebonyi, or with Enugu. So that way also we are thinking, having that kind of regional approach in the thinking. So it's not just about Imo State, but it's about Imo State and other states. But I agree with you that the other states and governors need to come together in ways that will create this kind of bottom-up approach as opposed to always trying to mimic what is happening at the federal level.
Well, it makes a world of sense. I mean, coming from a professor of sustainable growth or sustainable development, as professor of sustainability, it's only understandable that you'll be speaking in that same vein. So it is most appreciated. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for your thoughts. And wish Nigeria the best. Professor Kenneth Amaechi is Chair, Sustainable Finance, European University Institute, Florence. He is also Chief Economic Advisor to the Imo State government. Thank you again for your time, Prof.